The boardroom was silent enough to hear a diamond drop. Saraphina Blackwood, dressed in designer black, smirked at the head of the table, already measuring the drapes. She was the billionaire's young, beautiful partner, and this will reading was just a formality. Then, the heavy oak doors creaked open. A woman stood there, holding the hands of two small children, her coat thin and worn. It was Eliza, the first wife. The poor wife. The mistress screamed, "Get her out!" But the lawyer simply cleared his throat, looked at Saraphina, and said, "She is here at my request. Now let's begin." The executive boardroom of Vanderbilt Innovations wasn't just a room, it was a declaration of power. Occupying the entire 80th floor of the glass and steel tower that dominated the city skyline, its windows overlooked the world Arthur Vanderbilt had conquered. At the head of the massive, mirror-polished mahogany table sat Saraphina Blackwood. She was a vision in a custom-tailored Tom Ford morning suit, a black veil artfully failing to conceal her devastating and photogenic grief. Her rings, a new, massive diamond on her left hand that Arthur had given her just weeks before his sudden, shocking death, caught the light as she dabbed a tear from her eye with a silk handkerchief. She was the picture of the bereaved partner, the unofficial widow. The board members, sharks in bespoke suits, offered her murmured condolences, their eyes already calculating their next move. He just wanted to build a legacy," Saraphina whispered, her voice a practiced, breathy sob. "And I will ensure that legacy is protected." At the far end of the table, a man who looked as dry and expensive as the leather-bound books behind him cleared his throat. This was Mr. Harrison, senior partner at the highly esteemed law firm of Gable, Stern and Chadwick. He was Arthur's personal executor, a man whose face had been chiseled from granite and whose emotions, if he had any, were kept in a locked vault. "Thank you all for coming," Harrison began, his voice cutting through the performative grief. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Mr. Arthur Vanderbilt. Once this is concluded, the board can convene to discuss the future of the company." Saraphina offered a small, brave smile. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I know what Arthur wanted. We discussed it many nights. Let's just get this over with so we can begin the healing." She was already the queen in her own mind. Right as Harrison was about to unseal the thick vellum envelope, the boardroom doors pushed open with a heavy pneumatic hiss. Every head turned. In the doorway stood a woman who was the antithesis of everything in the room. She looked to be in her late 30s, but the exhaustion etched around her eyes made her seem older. Her beige coat was threadbare at the cuffs, her shoes were practical flats, scuffed at the toes. She held the hands of two small children, a boy of about 5 and a girl of about 3, who hid shyly behind her legs. The woman was Eliza Hayes. A collective gasp went through the room. The board members stared, confused. Who was this person? Saraphina, however, knew exactly who she was. Her perfectly sculpted face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "What is she doing here?" Saraphina hissed, rising from her chair. The grief was gone, replaced by icy rage. "Security! Get this street person out of my boardroom! How dare you interrupt our mourning!" Eliza flinched, pulling her children, Liam and Sophie, closer. She hadn't spoken a word, yet her presence was a bomb. "She is trespassing!" Saraphina shrieked, pointing a long scarlet-tipped finger. "This is a private meeting." Mr. Harrison, unfazed, looked up over his spectacles. "Please, Miss Blackwood, calm yourself." "Calm myself? That thing is here." "That thing," Harrison said, his voice dropping a decibel, "is Mrs. Eliza Hayes Vanderbilt, and she is here at my express invitation, as stipulated by the deceased." The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than before. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," one of the board members muttered. Saraphina let out a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "That's absurd. Arthur divorced her years ago. He threw her out. She's nobody. He told me the divorce was finalized in Cayman." Eliza finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, rusty from disuse, but clear. "He never served me any papers, Mr. Harrison." Harrison nodded, looking down at his file. "That is correct. While Mr. Vanderbilt and Ms. Blackwood were publicly associated, Mr. Vanderbilt never filed for divorce. Legally, Eliza Hayes Vanderbilt is, and always has been, his only wife." Saraphina stumbled back, her hand flying to her chest. That's a lie. He wouldn't. He loved me. He was ashamed of her." Eliza's eyes met Saraphina's. There was no hatred in them, only a deep, abiding weariness. "Hello, Saraphina. I'm sorry for your loss." That simple, dignified statement was more enraging to Saraphina than any insult. You snake," Saraphina snarled. "You think you can crawl back here and get a payday? He left you with nothing for a reason. You're poor. You're a failed experiment he left behind." "Miss Blackwood, if you cannot control yourself, I will have you removed," Harrison stated flatly. "Mr. Vanderbilt's will is very specific, and Mrs. Vanderbilt's presence is non-negotiable." Saraphina, choking on her own fury, sank back into the chairman's seat. But her eyes, cold and reptilian, never left Eliza. She was calculating. A forgotten wife? A legal technicality? Fine. Arthur would have left her a pittance, a go-away fund. Saraphina was still the public face, the one he loved. This was just one last piece of trash to take out. Eliza, meanwhile, was simply trying to keep her children calm. They were overwhelmed by the giant room and the angry woman in black. Liam, the little boy, looked at the model of a new high-rise on a side table. "Mummy," he whispered. "Did Daddy work here?" Eliza's heart cracked. "Yes, baby, he did." She hadn't come for money. She hadn't come for revenge. She had come because a cold, official man from a firm called Gable, Stern and Chadwick had sent a certified letter to her tiny two-bedroom apartment, stating that her attendance was required. She had come for one reason, to see if Arthur, the man who had erased her from his life, had at least remembered, in death, that he had 2 children. "Let's begin," Harrison said, cracking the seal on the will. Saraphina crossed her arms, a vicious smirk returning to her face. The real fight was about to start. It hadn't always been this way. 15 years ago, Arthur Vanderbilt and Eliza Hayes were indistinguishable. They were 2 brilliant, broke scholarship students at MIT, living on instant noodles and sharing a single, powerful dream. Arthur was the charismatic visionary, the salesman who could charm anyone. But Eliza was the architect. She was the coder, the one who spent 48-hour stretches in the library, fueled by vending machine coffee, writing the base code for what would become Aegis, the revolutionary data security algorithm that launched Vanderbilt Innovations. Arthur's name was on the company because he was the one who faced the venture capitalists. But Eliza's DNA was in every line of its code. They married a week after graduation, in a courthouse, with 2 witnesses they pulled from the hallway. Their first office was their tiny, unair-conditioned apartment. For 5 years they were a perfect team. He sold the dream. She built the reality. Then the money came. First millions, then hundreds of millions, then billions. The man Eliza had loved, the brilliant, funny nerd who quoted Shakespeare and loved bad sci-fi, began to disappear. He was replaced by Arthur Vanderbilt, the icon. He traded his glasses for contacts, his worn sweaters for bespoke suits, and his wife for a string of public-facing companions. Eliza, who was shy, who preferred a laptop to a red carpet, was shoved into the background. She was the college wife, the starter wife, a relic of his humble past. When she got pregnant with Sophie, he was furious. It was an inconvenience. When Liam was born 2 years later, he was on a yacht in Monaco. Then, 4 years ago, Saraphina Blackwood arrived. Saraphina was a minor socialite, famous for being famous, a creature of calculated beauty and ruthless ambition. She saw Arthur not as a man, but as a prize. She latched onto him, fed his ego, and convinced him that Eliza was an anchor, a chain holding him to a past he had transcended. The end was brutal and swift. Eliza came home from a rare grocery trip. Arthur kept her on a strict household allowance, while he spent millions to find the locks on their penthouse changed. A grim-faced security guard handed her a single suitcase, pre-packed by a stranger. "Mr. Vanderbilt's orders, ma'am." She was cut off. Every joint account, every credit card, every access point to the life she had helped build was severed. Arthur refused her calls. His lawyers sent her one single, terrifying letter. "Attempt to contest this separation, and we will use your documented history of postpartum depression to sue for full and sole custody of your children. Accept this, and you may keep them. Disappear." It wasn't a divorce. It was an erasure. So Eliza disappeared. She took her children and moved into a cramped apartment across the river, a world away from the Vanderbilt Tower she could see from her cracked kitchen window. She got a job as a night-shift data entry clerk, and later a second job tutoring high school programmers. She lived in poverty, clipping coupons, buying second-hand clothes, all while the man who was legally her husband graced the covers of business magazines, his arm draped around Saraphina. He never paid a cent of child support, because to do so would be to legally acknowledge the children he was pretending, to his new world, didn't exist. Eliza's dignity was her only shield. She never spoke to the press. She never complained. She poured every ounce of her love and energy into Sophie and Liam. She was teaching them to be kind, to be smart, to be nothing like the man who had abandoned them. When the news of Arthur's death, a sudden, massive heart attack at 42, flashed across the TV in her living room, she felt a profound, hollow numbness. Not grief for the monster he'd become, but a deep, aching sorrow for the brilliant, loving boy she had married, the one who had died long before his heart gave out. And now, sitting in this temple of his wealth, she felt nothing but an exposed nerve. Seraphina's venomous glare was nothing new. It was the same contempt the world had shown her for 4 years. She was the poor wife, the ghost at the feast. She braced herself for the final humiliation, to be left $1, to be formally and finally dismissed, and then to go home and figure out how to pay this month's rent. She pulled her children closer. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to them. "We're okay. It will be over soon." Seraphina watched her, a predator's smile on her lips. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "please do continue. Let's get this charity case sorted out." Harrison adjusted his tie. "Very well. I will now read the will of Arthur Vanderbilt." The room settled into a thick, expectant silence. The board members leaned forward. Seraphina sat perched on the edge of the chairman's seat, her whole body thrumming with anticipation. She had waited 4 years for this. 4 years of managing Arthur's ego, of pretending his rants were brilliant, of enduring his increasingly erratic behavior. This was her payday. Eliza just held her children's hands, her eyes fixed on a watermark on the table. I, Arthur Callum Vanderbilt, Mr. Harrison began, his voice a dry monotone, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all prior wills and codicils. He went through the initial, minor bequests, a sum of $100,000 to his alma mater, MIT, a collection of rare watches to his estranged brother, Julian, a small donation to an animal shelter. With each minor bequest, Saraphina's smile widened. This was just clearing the table before the main course. Now, Harrison said, turning a page, we come to the primary assets, specifically the New York penthouse, the estate in Geneva, the private jet, the art collection valued at approximately $300 million, and all personal effects. Saraphina visibly preened. She leaned forward, as if to physically accept them. Regarding Ms. Saraphina Blackwood, Harrison read. Saraphina's eyes snapped shut, a blissful, victorious smile on her face. Here it is. Who has been my constant companion for these past 4 years. I leave. Harrison paused, looking over his glasses as if to double-check the words. My complete collection of vintage neckties, which she so often admired. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer expectant. It was confused. Saraphina's smile froze, her eyes fluttering open. What? She stammered. Harrison continued, his voice unchanged. And I further bequeath to Ms. Saraphina Blackwood the sum of $1. The air was sucked from the room. The board members stared, frozen. Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Saraphina looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. Her face, a mask of curated beauty, contorted. That's a joke, she shrieked, her voice cracking into an ugly, shrill register. He's joking. Arthur has a dark sense of humor. Tell them, Harrison. Read the real part. This is the real part, Miss Blackwood, Harrison said, unmoved. $1. And his neckties. No! Saraphina slammed her hands on the table, her rings making a sharp crack against the wood. I won't accept this. This is absurd. He loved me. He was going to marry me. That witch. She lunged, pointing at Eliza. She did this. She must have forged this. She poisoned him against me. Eliza shrank back, her heart pounding. This was worse than she imagined. She hadn't been forgotten. She'd been used as a weapon. The will was signed by Mr. Vanderbilt a month ago, Harrison said calmly. It was validated by myself and 2 other partners from my firm. It is ironclad. Your entire bequest, Miss Blackwood, is the necktie collection and $1. I'll sue, Saraphina screamed, tears of pure rage now streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. I'll contest this. I'll tell the world. I have proof of our relationship. I have. She suddenly stopped. A new, terrifying and dawning realization was spreading across her face. The $1. The public humiliation. He hadn't just cut her out. He had scorned her. He had made her the punchline. He couldn't have... She whimpered, collapsing back into the chair. All the fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a cold, bottomless dread. She had been played. For 4 years, she thought she was the puppet master. But she was the one on the strings. Eliza watched this sudden, violent collapse. She felt a bizarre, unwelcome pang of, not pity, but recognition. The recognition of a fellow human being who had just been annihilated by Arthur Vanderbilt. Mr. Harrison, one of the board members finally said, his voice shaky. If Miss Blackwood gets nothing, then who? Harrison turned the page. We now come to the remainder of the estate. This includes all liquid assets, all stock portfolios, all properties not previously named, and most importantly, Mr. Vanderbilt's 51% controlling interest in Vanderbilt Innovations. This was it. The entire $50 billion empire. Saraphina, though defeated, looked up, her eyes narrowed with hatred. "It's the brother Julian," she spat. "He's giving it to that deadbeat brother just to spite me." "All remaining assets," Harrison read, his voice projecting clearly into the stunned void. "Real, personal, and mixed, of whatsoever kind, and wheresoever situated, I devise and bequeath in their entirety to—" He paused. He looked up, directly at Eliza. "My beloved wife, Eliza Hayes Vanderbilt." If the room had been silent before, it was now a vacuum. Time itself seemed to stop. Eliza just stared. The words hung in the air, unreal, like a sentence in a language she didn't understand. My beloved wife. In their entirety. It was impossible. It was a mistake. Liam tugged on her sleeve. "Mummy, is it over? Can we go home?" Saraphina made a sound. It was not a word. It was a low, guttural noise of pure, primal disbelief. Her head swiveled slowly, mechanically, toward Eliza. Her eyes were no longer just hateful. They were unhinged. "No, no, 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 no!" She scrambled up from the chair, her movements clumsy, frantic. "He wouldn't. He hated you. He threw you in the garbage. He told me. He called you his pathetic little project. He wouldn't give it to you." "The will is explicit," Harrison said. "Controlling interest in Vanderbilt Innovations, the penthouse, the Geneva estate, and all liquid funds, estimated at $9 billion, are transferred to Mrs. Eliza Vanderbilt, in trust for her and her children, Liam and Sophie Vanderbilt." He said their names. He said her children's names. Eliza's legs gave out. She didn't faint, but she sank heavily into the plush chair behind her. The poor wife, the data entry clerk, the woman who had been debating which utility to skip paying this month, was now, in the space of 30 seconds, one of the wealthiest women in the world. This was the moment the title of the story foretold. The mistress's reaction. Saraphina screamed. It was not a shout. It was not a yell. It was a raw, ear-splitting shriek of such profound, animalistic rage and loss that the board members physically recoiled. It was the sound of a universe ending. "I'll kill you!" she shrieked, her face purple, saliva flying from her mouth. She lunged across the corner of the table, clawing at Eliza. "You, poor, filthy, snake, it's mine! He promised me! It was mine!" Before her nails could reach Eliza's face, Harrison's personal security, two large men who had been standing impassively by the door, surged forward. They grabbed Saraphina by the arms, lifting her off her feet. But Saraphina was feral. She kicked and thrashed, her designer suit ripping at the seams. "You can't do this! I'll contest! I'll fight! I'll—" And then she stopped. A single, brilliant, horrifying idea seemed to strike her. The trashing ceased. The security guards, confused, loosened their grip. Saraphina slowly, deliberately, put a hand on her own stomach. She looked not at Eliza, but at the board members, at the men of power. Her hysteria vanished, replaced by a cold, triumphant, and utterly malicious smile. "You're all fools," she said, her voice dripping with a newfound confidence. This joke of a will, is invalid." Mr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds, Miss Blackwood?" Saraphina's smile was blinding. "On the grounds that Arthur left an heir he didn't know about. This will make no provision for his unborn child." She patted her flat stomach. "I," she announced to the room, "am pregnant with Arthur's son. And he," she pointed at her own womb, "will inherit everything. Checkmate, you pathetic cow." Eliza's world, which had just been inverted, shattered completely. A new child, a new heir. Saraphina had won after all. This inheritance, this impossible gift, would be torn away by the one thing Eliza couldn't fight: Arthur's new child. The children at her side would be usurped. The board members gasped. This changed everything. A posthumous child would have an undeniable claim. Saraphina laughed. It was a genuine, joyous, terrifying laugh. She had just gone from $1 to $50 billion in a single sentence. She looked at Mr. Harrison. "So, you can tear up that will now, you dusty old fossil? The Vanderbilt empire belongs to my son." Mr. Harrison did not flinch. He did not look surprised. He simply looked down at his papers, as if Saraphina's declaration was a minor, expected interruption. "You are referring," he said, "to Addendum B." Saraphina's smile wavered. "What?" "Addendum B, and the private letter addressed to Mrs. Vanderbilt." Harrison slid a slim, cream-colored envelope across the table to Eliza. Her name was on it, in Arthur's familiar, aggressive handwriting. "What is that?" Saraphina demanded. "What does it say?" "That," Harrison said, "is a private communication. However, Addendum B is very much a public matter." Eliza's hands trembled so violently she could barely pick up the envelope. A letter. From Arthur. After all this time. She clutched it to her chest, not opening it. Not yet. She was terrified of what it said. "What?" Saraphina demanded, her voice losing its confidence. "Is Addendum B?" The boardroom was a powder keg. Saraphina, held loosely by the guards, was vibrating with a mixture of triumph and new, creeping anxiety. Eliza sat like a statue, clutching the letter, her children staring, wide-eyed, at the unfolding chaos. "Addendum B," Mr. Harrison said, "was added to this will 1 month ago, at the same time as the main bequest. It pertains to any and all paternity claims made against the estate following the testator's death." Saraphina's face paled. He couldn't have known. "Mr. Vanderbilt," Harrison continued, "was a very thorough man." Eliza, seeing Harrison's calm, felt a tiny spark of something. Not hope, just less despair. With trembling fingers she unsealed the letter. Inside was a single folded sheet of stationery from Arthur's private office. "Eliza, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am sorry. That is the first thing I must say. Not for dying, but for everything else. I am so sorry. I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know the truth. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with a fast-acting, inoperable glioblastoma. The doctors gave me 3 months. I've stolen 3 more. Eliza, when they tell you that you're dying, the world becomes crystal clear. It's like a fog I've been living in for a decade, just burned away. And in that clarity, I saw what I had done. I saw what I had become. And I saw her, Saraphina. I saw that she was a parasite, a beautiful, charming, hollow thing that had attached itself to me. I saw that I had pushed away the only person, the only thing in my entire life that was ever real. You. I realized I had become a monster, and I had left you and my children to the wolves. I was so ashamed, Eliza. Too proud, too weak, and too sick to come to you and beg for forgiveness while I was alive. I couldn't fight her. She had insurance, letters, recordings. She was blackmailing me, in her own way, for half my fortune. She thought I was signing a new prenup. I was signing my will. This is my only way to fix it. My only confession. My only act of atonement. She told me she was pregnant a month ago. She thought it was her checkmate. She thought it would force me to divorce you and marry her, to secure her heir. But Eliza, you know me. You knew the real me. I was a planner. I was an architect. I am leaving you everything. Not as a gift, but as a return. You built this with me. It was always yours. You were the co-founder. You're the only one who knows the heart of the machine. Don't let the sharks tear it apart. Protect our children. Tell them I was a coward, but I tried to do one right thing in the end. Tell them their father was sorry. Forgive me, or don't. But live well. You've earned it. Arthur tears were streaming down Eliza's face. They were not tears of joy for the money. They were hot, agonizing tears of grief for the man she had loved so long ago, the man who had finally, briefly, returned, only to die. She was weeping for the lost years, for the pain, for the two children who would never know the brilliant, broken man who wrote this letter. She looked up from the page, her vision blurred. Saraphina was watching her, her face a mask of confusion and rage. What is it? What does it say? What did that bastard write? It says, Eliza said, her voice shaking but gaining strength, that he knew. Harrison took that as his cue. Addendum B, Miss Blackwood. You claim you are pregnant with Mr. Vanderbilt's child. I am, Saraphina shrieked. I have a positive test. I have a doctor's report. That may be, Harrison said, but Mr. Vanderbilt has provided a sworn affidavit, along with supporting medical documentation from his private physician, Dr. Alan Bridgewater, confirming a medical procedure he underwent 3 years ago. Saraphina's face was white. What? What procedure? A vasectomy, Harrison said, his voice as flat as a judgment. Performed shortly after the birth of his last legal child, Liam Vanderbilt. The procedure was, I am assured, 100% successful. The room went into total lockdown. The board members stared, mouths agape. Eliza's head swam. 3 years ago, after Liam was born, he had known, even then, that he wanted no more children. He had cut himself off. Saraphina's entire reality was crumbling. That's impossible. It's a lie, a forgery. The medical records are authenticated and attached, Harrison said. Mr. Vanderbilt knew he was not, and could not be, the father of your child. The implications of this were horrifying. Arthur had known. He had known, and he had let her play her little game. He had let her believe she had the ultimate trump card, all while he was building this final, meticulous trap. This wasn't just a disinheritance. It was a public execution. He had exposed her as a fraud, a liar, and a cheat in front of the very people she was trying to rule. Eliza looked at the hysterical, cornered woman. The letter explained it all. He was a planner, an architect. This was his final, brutal, perfect algorithm. But Saraphina, in her blind panic, had one last, desperate card to play. It's a mistake, she screamed. The vasectomy must have failed. It happened. It's his. I swear on my life, it's his. I would never. I loved him. I demand a DNA test. She was grasping at straws. A posthumous DNA test could tie this up in court for years. It was her only hope. A test! She screamed at the board. We must have a test! Mr. Harrison sighed. He looked down at his notes. Mr. Vanderbilt anticipated this as well. He looked up, not at Saraphina, but at the 2 guards. Please restrain Miss Blackwood. She may become violent. What? Saraphina snarled. What now? Mr. Vanderbilt, Harrison said, in his final weeks, was deeply interested in his companion's activities. He provided the estate with a full dossier. He lifted a separate, thick file from his briefcase. This is a report from a private investigations firm. A+ Strategic Solutions. It details your meetings, Ms. Blackwood, for the past 6 months. Saraphina stopped breathing. It seems, Harrison continued, that you were, in fact, having a secondary affair. Mr. Vanderbilt was sterile, but your personal trainer, a Mr. Damien Croft, is not. This was the final blow, the kill shot, the mention of the name Damien Croft, a real name, a specific, private name, was the key that unlocked Saraphina's final, desperate defense. It wasn't an abstract accusation. It was a fact. Saraphina's face didn't just go white. It went slack, empty, as all the blood rushed from it. The arrogance, the rage, the cunning, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. "No," she whispered. He couldn't. He was sick. He was in his room." "He was sick, yes," Harrison said. "But his surveillance systems were not. He provided us with audio, video, and paternity test pre-authorizations. The report is exhaustive." The board members were staring at her with open, unmitigated disgust. The woman who, an hour ago, was their presumed new leader, was now revealed as a cheap, lying adulterer. Eliza looked at the file, A+ Strategic Solutions. She felt a wave of nausea. Arthur. He had sat in his dying bed, watching this, watching his own life burn down and meticulously collecting the ashes. The cold, brilliant, vengeful mind of the man she had once known was on full display. It's... Saraphina's mind was broken. She was cycling through defenses, finding them all vaporized. She was trapped. She was ruined. Her reputation, her social standing, her one shot at the billions, all gone. She was worse than the poor wife. She was a public joke. She was the woman who got $1, a box of old ties, and caught cheating on her dying, sterile billionaire. This was the moment. She opened her mouth, and a sound came out that was inhuman. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart. It was a scream that contained all her lost ambition, all her narcissistic rage, and all her profound, utter defeat. "Lear!" she shrieked, launching herself, not at Eliza, but at Harrison, at the man who had delivered the judgment. "You're lying. You're all in it with her. I'll... She was a hurricane of flailing limbs and incoherent rage. The 2 security guards, who had been waiting for this, did not hesitate. They enveloped her, one grabbing her arms, the other her legs. She was unceremoniously lifted, kicking and screaming from the floor. "It's mine! He loved me! Damien! No, you bastards! You'll hear from my lawyers! My lawyers!" Her screams echoed down the marble hallway as she was dragged, like a common criminal, out of the boardroom and toward the service elevator. The heavy doors hissed shut. And then, silence. The most profound, deafening silence Eliza had ever known. It was over. The boardroom was a wreck. A chair was overturned. Water glasses were spilled. Saraphina's $5,000 handbag lay abandoned on the floor. Eliza was shaking, her own tears from the letter still wet on her cheeks. Her children were hiding their faces in her coat, terrified by the screaming. She stroked their hair. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. The monster's gone. It's over." The board members stared at her. Their expressions were a complex cocktail of shock, pity, and a new, dawning, terrified respect. The poor wife, the ghost, the charity case, was now their boss. She was the 51% controlling shareholder. She was the chairwoman. She was Vanderbilt Innovations. The sound of the heavy boardroom doors hissing shut was unnaturally loud, a definitive pneumatic thud that sealed the room. The echo of Saraphina's last, desperate shriek seemed to hang in the air, a metallic tang of ozone and rage, and then silence. It was not a calm silence. It was a vacuum, a void left by the hurricane that had just ripped through. The overturned chair lay on its side, a fallen soldier. A puddle of spilled water slowly crept across the polished mahogany, dripping onto the plush carpet. Saraphina's $5,000 handbag lay abandoned, a pathetic, glittering piece of roadkill. The board members, 8 men, all titans of industry, all masters of their own universes, were frozen. They were pale, some visibly shaking. They stared at Eliza as if she were an apparition, a ghost who had suddenly materialized and started throwing lightning. The poor wife, the charity case, the pathetic little project, was now, inarguably, the single most powerful person in their lives. Eliza herself was trembling, a deep, a cellular vibration she couldn't control. The letter from Arthur was a burning rectangle in her coat pocket. The grief was a physical thing, a stone in her chest, not for the monster he'd become, but for the brilliant, broken boy he had been, the one who had written that final, agonizing confession. Her children, Liam and Sophie, were clinging to her legs, their faces buried in her worn coat, their small bodies shaking. She looked at the men. She saw their shock, and beneath it, she saw the rapid, frantic calculations in their eyes. They were sharks, and the smell of blood, Saraphina's blood, was still in the water. But now, a new, larger predator had just entered the tank. Eliza took a deep breath, and a switch was thrown. It was a conscious, deliberate act. She mentally compartmentalized the grief, the shock, the 4 years of poverty and humiliation, and locked them in a box. She had been Eliza Hayes, the victim, for 1,460 days. That person was no longer viable. That person could not protect these children from the men in this room. She straightened her back. It wasn't just a physical change, it was an alignment. She had spent 4 years hunched over, trying to make herself smaller, to be invisible. Now she felt her own height. She shed the poor wife like a threadbare coat. The woman who stood up was not the victim. It was the architect, the co-founder, the woman who had written the first 1,000,000 lines of code for the Aegis Protocol upon which their entire $50 billion empire was built. Her eyes, which had been downcast and weary, lifted. They were clear, sharp, and icy cold. The first shark to test the waters was Gregory Vance, the CFO. He was a man who prided himself on his silver fox charm. He stood, hastily buttoning his suit jacket and smoothing his hair. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," he began, his voice a buttery, synthetic purr. "Eliza, if I may, on behalf of the entire board, we want to offer our deepest condolences. And of course our congratulations. This is all a profound shock. But Arthur, in his final wisdom, clearly, you may not," Eliza said. The butter-smooth tone in Gregory's voice froze and cracked. I beg your pardon." Eliza's voice was no longer the rusty, quiet thing it had been. It was low, clear, and cut like a scalpel. "You may not call me Eliza. You will address me as Mrs. Vanderbilt, and you will stop talking." Gregory flushed a deep, ugly crimson. He was the CFO. He was not used to being spoken to this way, especially by a woman who looked like she'd gotten lost on her way to a temp job. "Now, see here," he blustered. "No, you see here, Gregory," Eliza said, taking a step toward him. The board members flinched. "I remember you. The 2019 gala for the new building. I was there with Arthur. He had, for a moment, forgotten to be ashamed of me. You, Mr. Vance, patted my arm, told me I was a very pretty little thing, and asked me to fetch you another glass of champagne. You assumed I was the catering staff." Gregory's mouth opened and closed. He had no memory of it, which was precisely the point. "I wasn't the catering staff," Eliza continued, her voice resonating in the silent room. "I was at that time, still, technically, chief systems architect. The architect of the very platform that pays your 7-figure salary. You've been working in my house for 15 years, Mr. Vance, and you never once bothered to learn my face." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The quiet, factual precision of the takedown was more brutal than Saraphina's scream. Gregory Vance, the man of numbers and charm, visibly shrank and sat back down, his face the color of ash. Eliza's gaze swept the table, landing on each man in turn. They refused to meet her eyes. "For 4 years," she said, "this board has acted as a glorified fan club for a socialite. You have sat in this room, in my company's boardroom, and you have not just allowed, you have applauded the systemic plundering of its assets. You watched as she treated the corporate treasury like her personal piggy bank. You, all of you, are complicit." An older man, Marcus Shaw, the only one who hadn't openly fawned over Saraphina, finally spoke. His voice was gravelly. "Mrs. Vanderbilt, with respect, the relationship between Ms. Blackwood and Arthur was complex. As a board, our duty is to the shareholders, and the share price has never been higher." "The share price," Eliza snapped back, "is high because of the Aegis Protocol, a protocol I designed, a system built on security, on firewalls, on identifying and eliminating vulnerabilities. And you, Mr. Shaw, all of you, have sat here and allowed the most blatant, resource-draining Trojan horse in corporate history to waltz in, set up a couch, and demand you redecorate. You are all a vulnerability. You are all a liability. And I," she said, tapping her own chest, "am a systems architect. I don't tolerate vulnerabilities." She walked with a calm, deliberate pace to the head of the table. She looked at the massive, ornate chairman's seat, the seat Saraphina had occupied, the seat Arthur had ruled from. She didn't sit. Not yet. She stood behind it, placing her hands on its carved wooden arms. "So, here is what is going to happen," she announced. She pulled her daughter, Sophie, into her arms. The little girl, exhausted and scared, simply buried her head in her mother's neck. Eliza, holding her child, looked like a warrior queen. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Sharp, this board will reconvene." "But Mrs. Vanderbilt," a man named Peterson whined, "the funeral arrangements, the period of mourning. Don't you need time?" "I have been in mourning for the man I married for over a decade," Eliza said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "And my processing was done on a data entry night shift while I worried about eviction. I don't need any more time. You, however, are running out of it." She shifted Sophie on her hip. "At 8 a.m., I want 3 things on this table. First, a full, unredacted, line-item audit of what I am now calling Project Saraphina. That will include the $50 million renovation of the Geneva estate, the $10 million budget for her influencer parties, the $12 million contract for her lifestyle brand that never produced a single product, and," she paused, "the $5 million consulting fee paid to a shell company called Mystic Star Guidance LLC. I believe that was her astrologer?" The board members looked physically ill. They had all signed off on it. Arthur had demanded it, and Saraphina had charmed them. They thought it was the cost of doing business. "Second," Eliza continued, "I want a complete operations report from every department head. I want to know what this company actually does anymore, or if it's just a machine that prints money for vultures." She looked at them, her eyes promising a reckoning. "And third, I want each of your resignations, signed, dated, and on this table. The room erupted. "Our resignations! That's preposterous! You can't!" Gregory Vance sputtered, finding his voice. "We have contracts, fiduciary responsibilities. We are the board." "You were the board," Eliza said, her voice slicing through the noise. "As of 2 days ago, you are employees, and your new boss, the 51% controlling shareholder, is giving you your first performance review. Tomorrow morning is your job interview. You will each, one by one, justify your existence. You will prove to me that you are not as useless, sycophantic, and parasitic as the woman you just allowed to be dragged from this room." She let that sink in. The silence was absolute. "You have." She glanced at her own cheap, cracked screen watch. 18 hours. If you cannot prove your value, you're out. Unceremoniously. I will gut this entire floor and I will start over. I built this company from nothing once, gentlemen. Do not, for 1 second, believe I cannot do it again. Am I clear? No one spoke. No one breathed. She turned to Mr. Harrison, who was calmly arranging his papers, his face a mask of professional neutrality. But Eliza thought she saw, in the barest twitch of his lips, a flicker of approval. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her tone softening slightly. "My husband's letter mentioned a specific investigation firm, A+ Strategic Solutions. Are they still retained?" "They are, Mrs. Vanderbilt, on a standing retainer with the estate," Harrison confirmed. "Good. I want them to start a full background and financial investigation on every member of this board, effective immediately. I want to know who was getting kickbacks from Saraphina's projects, who had side deals, who was compromised. I want to know where every skeleton is buried. Understood?" "Perfectly, Mrs. Vanderbilt." Marcus Shaw, the older board member, leaned forward. He wasn't fawning. He wasn't protesting. He was assessing. "Mrs. Vanderbilt," he said, "you have made your position on this board clear. What is your position on the company itself? What is your first directive for Vanderbilt Innovations?" This was the real question. Was she a destroyer or a builder? Eliza finally sat down in the massive chairman's seat. It was cold, but it fit her perfectly. She settled Sophie on one knee and pulled Liam, who had been silent this whole time, onto the other. The image was jarring. A mother in a second-hand coat, holding her 2 small children, sitting on a throne of corporate power. She looked at Marcus Shaw. "My first directive, Mr. Shaw, is to recalibrate our values. This company's wealth was built on a promise of security, of protection. It's time we honored that mission." She turned to Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, begin the immediate, and I mean immediate, liquidation of the Geneva estate, the entire European art collection, the private jet, and the penthouse in New York. I don't want to set foot in a single place she ever was." The board gasped. That was billions in assets. What are you doing with that capital?" Gregory stammered. "It's seed money," Eliza said. "We are establishing the Hayes Vanderbilt Foundation." She had put her own maiden name first. "Its sole mission," she continued, "will be to provide elite, pro bono, legal and financial support to spouses and children who are being erased by powerful, wealthy partners. The kind of people who get a single suitcase dropped in a lobby. The kind of people who are threatened with the loss of their children if they dare to fight back. We will fund the best, most ruthless divorce and custody lawyers in the country. We will provide forensic accountants. We will, in short, build an army of Mr. Harrisons for the people who can't afford one. My husband," she looked at Harrison, "created a trap to catch one predator. I am going to use his wealth to build a shield for 1 million innocent people." Liam, her son, who had been listening intently, tugged on her sleeve. "Mommy," he whispered, his small voice carrying in the tense quiet. Did Daddy leave us the big plane?" Eliza's heart, the one she had locked away, cracked. She turned and kissed the top of his head. "No, baby," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion for the first time. "Daddy left us a very big, very important job. We're giving the plane away to help other mummies and kids who are in trouble." Liam considered this, then nodded. "Okay, that's good." Eliza took a final, steadying breath. She had delivered her judgment. She had set the new agenda. She was done. She stood up, holding her children's hands, the new Trinity. She didn't look back at the board members. They were already, in her mind, ghosts of the past, waiting to see if they had a future. She walked to the door, a woman in a beige coat, holding the hands of two small children, leaving a room full of the most powerful men in the city reeling in her wake. She paused at the threshold and looked back, not at the board, but at Mr. Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, thank you. Please have a car sent to my current address, and I'll need a new security detail, effective immediately. One for me and a separate 2-man team for my children. I want them with us 24/7. Send me the bill." "It's already handled, Mrs. Vanderbilt," the lawyer said, standing. "They are waiting for you in the lobby. The car is bulletproof." Of course it was. Arthur's letter had confessed to one final act of atonement. But Harrison had executed it. He was the one she could trust. "Thank you," she said. Her final look was at the stunned, ashen-faced board. "Gentlemen, 8 a.m., don't be late, and I suggest you spend the night preparing. It will be an interesting day." Eliza Hayes Vanderbilt turned her back on them and walked out of the boardroom with her children. The doors hissed shut, leaving the titans of industry to their terror and to the dawn of a new and very different empire. And so, the poor wife, who had built the empire and been cast aside, returned to claim her throne. Saraphina, the mistress, lost everything: the money, the man, and her reputation, all in one spectacular, karmic collapse. Eliza Vanderbilt proved that true power isn't about the clothes you wear or the people you know. It's about the steel in your spine and the brilliance in your mind. She didn't just inherit a fortune, she took back what was rightfully hers. What did you think of Arthur's final, devastating plan? Was it justice, or was it cold-blooded revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of karmic retribution, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see justice served, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories every single week. You won't want to miss what's coming next.